एक खेल है औरंगे सुलेमा मेरे नजदीक, एक बात है एजाज मसीहा मेरे आगे। जुज नाम नहीं सूरत आलम मुझे मंजूर, जुज वहम नहीं हस्ती आशिया मेरे आगे। होता है निहा गर्द में सहरा मेरे होते, घिसता है जबी खाक पे दरिया मेरे आगे. With that wonderful inaugural couplet from Ghalib, uh, I welcome you all into this Sunday evening 7 p.m. IST show of Sheetalath Conversations. We are having today 96th historic conversation, and this is a very chilling month. And December, this winter has just started showing its colors. But yes, the sunbeam sometimes strikes at our window panes, and it gives a feeling of warmth. And then the basking in the sun and the chill together interplay and make it a very, very romantic season. That's what life is all about. Having said that, I once again am really grateful to everyone, all the diaspora seekers and the followers of Sheetal of Conversations program, about this journey, the wonderful journey we started 2.5 years ago, and in which we go into the back spots, backyards, visit the time spaces, visit the time spots from in centuries and millennia, and then rejoice over it. In a way, we celebrate our legacy. We celebrate the life from ancient times in this part of the country known as Kashmir, which is nestled in the right lap of Himalaya, majestic Himalaya. And this sounds so well, and we have been enjoying it all along. I'm really thankful to all of you, and we have been traversing through all the aspects of this, this panorama, which we go and this journey which we take every Sunday with a very, very brilliant man, with a very, very brilliant public figure, who are always known by their integrity, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, brilliance. And then we traverse through this, travelogues, chronicles, ecology, sociology, art, literature, musicology, ancient wisdoms, legends, maestros, geniuses, men and matters, as D.P. Dar used to say in his columns, and all the aspects of transitions, monarchies, archaeology, architecture, and also about the people who have been in Kashmir and who have lived Kashmir and migrated to Kashmir to other parts of the country, like in undivided India, like plains of Lahore, Rajasthan, Jaipur, and Allahabad, Calcutta, and we have been almost able to bring in forth many aspects, many dimensions of this very, very interesting cause and a very, very enchanting program. Having said that, I feel that today we must certainly know that today is a time when Henry Kissinger very recently died in 29th November, I suppose. And Henry Kissinger is a very, very well-known personality, especially if we go to the legacy of the Cold War era. And he initially it is said that he was very bad and nasty, has puts very nasty words about Indraji in those days. And but later on, at one point of time, it is said that he appreciated Indraji, and he said that we could have any men like Indraji in their Republican Party in USA. And then again, we in very recent times, he has talked about Narendra Bhai Modi. That Narendra Bhai Modi, I'm a fan of Narendra Bhai Modi, and I always wanted very close ties between India. And that's what Henry Kissinger. Why I mentioned Henry Kissinger? Because today we are going into the arena of the Cold War period, arena of bipolar world, arena of undismantled USSR, arena of uncertainty, arena of formation of a new nation with challenges like a great country like India. And we are going to have a very romanticizing, very, very very fascinating view about some great personalities. It is said that Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, when B.P. Krishna Menon helped him in assisting in consolidating these 526 states, and he finally said that I'm an ICS man. What should I do in the modern India? Then Patel Sahab told him that, earlier you worked for the British. Now is the need of people like you who are trained as ICS and administrators by British to work for their country. So today I'm going to talk about, there are many wonderful people who helped this nation to move on from the times when we had nothing, when this great nation of Anishan nation was looted by the colonizers, and we were in a very gruesome situation. At that point of thing, these things started moving on. So, but I'm going to talk about one particular very popular syndicate, which was known as Kashmir Syndicate or Gang of Four, and they were the very instrumental people in shaping up the spine of the institutions of this modern India in that at that point of time, in that time space when it was very challenging. And these were the people who were responsible for international relations, who were responsible for institution building. They were assisting our political masters and their ideology with the brilliance. But one thing great about them was always that they were great, honest, nationalist. They devoted their entire life, their brilliance, their intelligence for this great country. And yet they never asked for the worth, asked for the recognition. They were the great, to me, I'm personally feel very great about these two people. Especially one is this Parveshwar Narayan Haksar, and another is this Aran Kao, Rameshwar Nath Kao, and then DP Dar, and then TN Kaul Saab, and then PN Dar. And also Nehru, BK Nehru, and all other people, they were also there. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a very big expert on the issue, and I have understood one thing, that during the Kamaraj plan, as Indira Gandhi was pitted against Morarji Desai by the Kamaraj group, and Indira Gandhi was very smart when she came. She was known as Gungi Gudia, and she knew nothing. And finally, she wrote to P.N. Haksar, who was a deputy something attaché at the London, this London embassy, and he was brought forth and summoned by Mrs. Gandhi. And then the whole scenario changed. He became the master strategist, and the entire thing, the gamut of, there are many things which had happened in between, the Bangladesh war and the emergence of Sikkim and other many aspects. Even one privy purses and nationalization of banks and a huge number of things. I am not an expert on all these things, but I'll be just, as a layman's way, I'm going to communicate and tell you that that man played a very pivotal role. A man learned in Sanskrit, learned in literature, master strategist whom everybody respected. And then Aran Kao, who never even wrote few lines about his biography, who was shied from the public, but he was a huge spy master who was even respected by the French and by the world's best possible intelligence agencies. And he created this Research and Analyzing Wing, International Intelligence Agency of India. And then everything is history. And then we have Kaul Saab, who was hated by Americans for their pro-Russian leaning. And then P.N. Dar Saab, great economist who founded the Delhi School of Economics. And then you have DP Dar, who doesn't know DP Dar, and his contribution to this great nation, especially. They were all probably groomed from the Nehru's time, and gradually they input everything what they had for the development of this great nation. And I think I'm a very small man to talk about these wonderful people. Today we have in our studio one of the foremost and the leading public intellectual and writer, an eminent academician, very well-known academician, an author of repute, a thinker, a formidable thinker. He has been, his profusely worked in the areas of this international relations, contemporary and the modern history, and political science. He was the first. He was the very youngest vice chancellor of the public university, chosen in 2002. He became the youngest vice chancellor, and he was a pioneer in creating the Australia-India relationship, and he was the first director of Australia-India, the Australia inaugural director of the Australia-India, this institute. And he has many accolades, and he has written several books, especially on this strategies, nuclear strategies, Indo-Pak relations, Kashmir, and many other aspects. And recently, he has co-authored a book. It was very recently released, and he is born to a very great family of, as being said, as I've heard, he's born to a very big landlord family feudal lord family of Kashmir, ancestral family of Kashmir, who were the administrators in their own times. And he has a legacy that his mother, Professor Nirja Mattoo, is a very well-known personality. She's a great academician and a great writer, and his father was a great, well-known civil servant. And his contribution is immense. He's a former alumni of Burnhall School, famous Burnhall School, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Oxford University. He's a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University and also professor of international relations at this Faculty of Arts, Melbourne University. And besides that, he has been a visiting professor to many universities, Notre Dame and Stanford University and Illinois Urbana Campaign University and many other institutions. He's written a number of articles published in most prestigious souvenirs and this magazines of the globe, of India and the globe. And he is a daily contributor to the most reputed daily newspapers of India. He's a man with many facets. He has been awarded, rewarded, recognized, and for his great contribution at a very younger age. So sometimes I wonder that if he had been in the Indian administrative service and in police service, maybe he would have done. Maybe that's my perspective with my own gogs. I wish, but he's a man with a wonderful matter. We are really proud of him. And certainly today's subject, I was searching for a long whom to invite. Amitabh is normally busy, but somewhere down the line I got catch of him, and finally he agreed. So let's welcome with great warmth and great happiness and great affection one of our own, son of the soil, Professor Padamshri, Professor Amitabh Mattoo in the studio.
Namaskar.
Welcome into the 96th illustrious historic show of Sheetal Conversations.
Thank you very much, Jugalji. I'm a great admirer of Sheetalnath Conversations. I think you played a absolutely pioneering role in archiving all these interviews, because for researchers of tomorrow, this will be real source material. Your interviews, your conversations, your detailed insights, fantastic. And you've done this as a pure labor of love, is commendable. Frankly speaking, you should be awarded by the community and by others for your service, for your yeoman service that you have delivered. So I'm privileged and honored to be part of your conversations and to be the 96th, although you haven't crossed a century, but I hope I can help you come closer to that century by my participation today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amitabh-ji. It is really a great honor and great delight and great privilege to have you face to face with me in a conversation. Certainly, everybody is waiting for this program since long, and we had to postpone it between due to India-Australia match, and now we are here. So let's begin this entire journey essentially in our first segment, as per the paradigm and structure of this program. We go into the visitors' memoirs. We make visitor to jog down to the childhood memories, juvenile days memories of Kashmir, its ecology, its sociology, institutions, the family, and other aspects, other wonderful aspects and anecdotes, which really are very reminiscent in your memoirs, which you would like to share with us. Please elucidate, sir.
So, like most Kashmiri Pandits who grew up in the Kashmir of the 60s, I had what may be described as an idyllic childhood. We lived in a large household in Gokjibag. My grandfather, my grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, my two aunts, my uncle, and my parents and my brother all lived in one house in Srinagar. And the multitude of influences that I grew up with defined my identity while growing up. I mean, if you traveled, when you grew up, you heard, in the evening, you heard my grandmother tell you stories from the Mahabharata. And she was fluent in Sanskrit and Urdu and a little bit of Persian. I remember those stories. And in fact, my most recent book on the Mahabharata and stories from the Mahabharata owes a lot to her. The first shloka of the Bhagavad Gita was something that she would relate or recite all the time when Dhritarashtra asks Sanjay, Dharma kshetre Kurukshetre Samveta Yutsava Mahamakaha Pandraksheve Kim Kurvant Sanjaya.
Uh-huh.
Tell me, Sanjay, with your divine vision, what's happening on this battlefield? I got to know the whole concept of dharma through through those stories that my grandmother told me. You went down a few steps to my mother's place, and you got a sense of literature and Eliot and all the other great poets and Shakespeare.
Your
And
grandfather was a professor. Your grandfather was a professor,
my
English
grandmother,
professor.
no, my grandmother was a homemaker in a sense, or in the language of political correctness, but she was much more. She was like a matriarch. She was someone who controlled the household, but always for 16 hours a day she would on her bed, and but she would, through almost a kind of divine remote control the whole household. She had grown up in Lahore, so she was a uh, she was also a, in today's day and age, she could be described as an ultimate conspiracy theorist, because she used to believe that there are conspiracies being hatched somewhere along the way. But she was also profoundly scholarly and also very wise. So she was someone who was there as a matriarch. You went down and you met our mother told us stories from Shakespeare, read out books on Agatha Christie, but also imbibed in us that the essence of Hinduism, and this was really like any Kashmiri Pandit household, um, uh, deeply privileging Brahmanical scholarship or education. She told us the concepts of what T.S. Eliot, for instance, had described as the last lines of The Wasteland, his great poem, Datta
Yeah.
Damyata Dayadam, which means self control, compassion, generosity of characters. These are the essences of every religion, and these should define your character. My grandfather was an administrator. He was generous beyond a cause. I mean, we heard growing up stories of how he had given away wealth to political leaders, including those on opposing sides of the spectrum. Here was a person who was Wazir-e Wazarat for 7 years, first during the Maharaja's time, then during the Sheikh's time, and also for continued to almost Bakshi's time. Here was someone who defined the word consensus and being able to rise above partisan politics. Then we had an uncle who was a bachelor, but who was deeply only concerned about ancient Indian Kashmiri philosophy, whether it was Abhinav Gupta or other great scholars of Kashmir. So this was a remarkable household, and then me and my brother trying to straddle these different worlds of wanting to be like normal human beings and yet living in this household. And of course, the first person who we saw as a sister, as a model figure, was our own aunt, who was the youngest sister of my father, who who did a PhD and then went abroad. First person in our family who went abroad went to Southeast Asia, and we heard the word Philippines, for instance, for the first time in our lives. So
Yeah.
this
That's
was
all.
a household which was remarkable. My father, my uncle, my mother, they all were characters. There was no one who was in some ways a stereotype. So they were beyond stereotypes. And then my maternal family was my mother's father was Professor Shamlal Dhar, and he was equally remarkable person who had brought his family from downtown Srinagar to Safa Kadal to Exchange Road, built a house for himself, and was completely committed to scholarship and to the world of ideas. So every weekend we'd spend with our Matamal, and then the whole neighborhood was one which defined syncretism and, in some ways, the composite culture of Jammu and Kashmir. You had a Sikh neighbor, you had the Drabus, who are still very good friends of ours, living across the road. We grew up with them, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims. You had all sorts of other different personalities, including renowned professors, including great scholars, administrators. And then we all went to, as you said, Burnhall School. And Burnhall School was a Christian school where you began the day by saying the Lord's Prayer. All
Yeah.
this came effortlessly to us. We didn't see any conflict. Yes, occasionally there was conflict. There was a match, India Pakistan match, and there would be predictable slogan shouting when Pakistan won. But those were trivial differences. It was, as I said, idyllic. We enjoyed life. The air was pure. There was no violence. We grew up as gentle, compassionate, generous human beings who shared a deeply intense relationship of friendship with all our friends, irrespective of the community that they came from. This is not built on nostalgia. When I keep telling my children or my friends who often have a binary view of the world, not my children, but others, they I said, this is not nostalgia, this is not romanticism, this was the world that we grew up with. Yes, there might have been discrimination. Yes, people did feel deprived of opportunities. The Kashmiri pundits were because historically people said they have been educated before, so they didn't get admission to medical colleges and engineering college. But these seem to matter much less at that age. Of course, I became politically conscious much later and realized that there are policies of affirmative discrimination which can go terribly wrong, that there is corruption, political corruption. But when we were growing up, frankly, these things didn't matter to us. Jugal Sahab, I've spoken perhaps for too long, but when you get into my
No, no,
childhood, then it's often difficult to get me to even pause.
no, no, it's so wonderful. I mean, I really don't want to pause. I really want to don't interrupt, because this is so wonderful. Every word of the way you have spoken about it is like a great that saga of literature. I mean, that is being witnessed by you, like William Wordsworth or other great poets have described their own native lands. But you have exactly and defined this whole syncretic culture of Kashmir, which was there was no Ram and Rahim, there was no Anil and Sahban. It was all kind of, we are all Kashmiris, and we lived with the mountains, we lived with the water bodies, and we lived with the institutions. There was no discrimination in institutions and schools and other things. But Amitabhji, I really want to know more about Burnhal school and the excursions and the pilgrimages. And did you ever go to the Dunga cruise and expeditions, going to Shankaracharya, cycling, this cross boat race? Yeah.
You see, Burnhall School, unlike Stendhal Biscoe School, the mottos were different. Biscoe School had as its motto, "In all things be men," which meant that you learn to be physically fit, you learn to fight for your rights, and you take care of your family and your country. Burnhall had a reputation of being a bit of a sissy school. So we had a motto called Industria Florimus: work hard, and that scholarship will help you carve out your niche in the world. But Burnhall also, we had remarkable teachers, including Irish Catholic fathers who came, who were principals throughout the time that I spent time in Burnhall, except for year 10th. We had Irish Catholic fathers. There was Father Jones, who was there for most of our period that we spent in school, and Father Farrow, who took us on scouts uh, camps in Pahalgam, which was a remarkable way of again getting to know each other. I think in some ways, Burnhall inspired you to work hard, but also to be different and to not feel insecure to be different. There is this great poem, which in some ways I quote because it so much reflects my own life, and I almost remember it almost by heart, which is a Robert Frost poem, and very
Uh,
well known Robert Frost poem. And Jugalji, you will probably, because given your kind of poetical knowledge, you will probably immediately empathize with that. It's The Road Not Taken. And I
road
took
not
the road
taken.
not taken.
Yeah,
Two
very popular.
roads converged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both. And me, one traveler, long I stood and looked down, one as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth,
Yeah.
then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for that, passing there had worn them really about the same. So I took the road not taken. I did not take up science. I took up humanities after Burnhall School. But in Burnhall School itself, it became clear to me that while the pressure was on the road to do engineering and science, which was a well trodden road, I was not built that way. Burnhall School gave me the confidence to take the road not taken. which was a road of arts, literature, writing, being creative, understanding politics. Because to me, what became clear while I was growing up and reading all these books was that while scientists are important and technology is important, while medicine is the most generous and compassionate field, that unless you know how states are run, how power is executed, how power is displayed in public life, you will not be able to make a real difference. And I wanted to make a real difference.
That's so wonderful. Any inspiring principal, any inspiring teacher in your during your college days, academic days, and as well as during
In my
burnout?
school days, there was certainly, I mean, all of them were inspiring in some ways. There was Professor Professor Handu, who taught us mathematics, who was immaculately dressed, who still
Yeah,
lives, I
yeah,
think,
know
in
him.
Rishikesh. Handu Saab is a great legendary figure. There was Bakshi
Elegant,
Saab,
eloquent.
who taught us mathematics and slapped us each time we got a problem wrong because physical punishment was seen as part of the course. There was Mrs. Vatal, whose son studied with us, Virendra Vatal, very bright young man who's also taken the road not taken.
No,
She's
not
there,
taken.
lives in Shivpura. I have the greatest admiration for her. Hindi was never my forte. My brother, Mrs. Vatal, still reminds me of how my brother's handwriting was fantastic. But as I said, I did not uh, have a great love for writing Hindi at that stage. It's just over the years that I've developed a love for Sanskrit and the classical texts that I have, in some ways, almost taught myself the importance of these texts. And I, of course, take inspiration by the fact that you can recite Urdu poetry with the kind of felicity that you do, and you did in the beginning of this program. So, Mrs. Vatal, Father Jones, Father Farrow, these are outstanding people committed and with such degree of passion, because teaching is a profession that whose value can never be determined in terms of salaries, the effort that you put in, the dedication that you put in. And that also inspired me to ultimately become a teacher. Now, because if you ask me at the end of the day how I should be identified as, is just that he was a teacher who tried to teach and who tried to learn.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And suddenly you had the teachers. Your grandfather was a teacher. Your mother was a very, very well-known teacher. She was in the Shitalath conversations in one show, and it was a really all her students poured away from all the parts of the world, and she is so well respected. So you belong to a legacy of teachers. But still, a question comes to me. Mr. Ogra sent me a question in the morning. He said, "Ask him, ask Professor Mattu, why did he choose being a teacher, being an academician, rather than just doing some great work like we are talking about the Gang of Four for this great country as a bureaucrat, as a civil servant."
At one stage in life, when I went to JNU, I also went to jail, which is not part of the biodata that you read out, which is I went to, as a part of the student protests in JNU, I spent 10 days in Tihar jail as a Class B under trial.
Bihar
Uh,
jail. Oh,
so
God.
anyone who tells me why I went to jail, I'll say, look, I've done that as well. So I went to jail as well, and I was bailed out by my uncle, Mr. Anupam Dhar, who was my mother's brother, and who I have a great deal of empathy for him because he always took the road not taken as well. And in some ways, we had a mutual solidarity society between us. So he was a larger than life person. So after leaving JNU, after actually being active in student protests, I wasn't part of the left. I wasn't a part of the right. We were part of the group called the Free Thinkers, who defined
Three
themselves
things.
by saying that I may not agree with what you say, but I shall fight with my life for your right to say it. That we'll defend your right to speak, your right to say what you want to say without censorship, although I may completely, fundamentally, totally disagree with what you say. This is Voltaire during the French Revolution.
Yes.
And also a kind of fleshing out of Descartes' philosophy. I think, therefore, I am. This is what differentiates me for the rest of living beings in the planet. And the process of thinking, articulating, expressing, speaking out is essential to my very being. So, having done political activism, having finished my master's in international relations, and that was also road travel because my aunt, who was watching this program, so I am in some ways also ensuring that she stays my favorite aunt for the foreseeable future. So, she had done a PhD in international relations. So and everyone else, like every Kashmiri Pandit, middle class person says, you have to get a job. Okay,
Yes,
after
that's
Bernal School, you decided you didn't want to do science and you didn't want to do engineering or medicine, and that it was not the right choice for you. Okay, so now you're not an engineer, now you're not a doctor, you're not a scientist. What are you going to be? Are you going to be just a freelancer? Because I had started writing articles occasionally, which offended because I'm by nature what Sartre was described as an enfant terrible, which means a
yeah.
naughty boy, which means I like to provoke people occasionally. So I wrote articles once against Dr. Farooq Abdullah, and my father blamed me for his immediate transfer. After that article, he said, "You offended Farooq." I said, if he gets offended by an article written in Probe magazine by a 22-year-old young man
Young
studying
boy.
in JNU, then dad, you don't need to serve against under him. I said this to him. But for a
That's good.
long time, people said, "Oh, you've written this article. He's offended. She's offended." I remember Ashok Jaitley once called me up, said, "You called Farooq Abdullah a joker." Because I mean, the point of youth is to be angry. Point of youth is not to accept shibboleths and actually provoke people. That's what I did. So I said, I, his friends used to address him as Tony Jaitley, but I didn't have that familiarity. So I said, Mr. Jaitley, this is an article written by a young man who has no interest in that time in politics. I'm just writing it to provoke, to create a generate a debate. You have a
In the
friendship, you have
society.
a sense of loyalty with Dr. Abdullah. And in fact, over the years, Dr. Abdullah has grown in my estimation because I think his resilience, his ability to be forgiving is remarkable in many, many ways. And I do not believe, like
Yes,
many
yes.
other people do, that he's not a
That is true.
nationalist. I think he's a nationalist to the core. Anyway,
He's a
having said
nationalist.
that,
He's a great nationalist. Yeah.
then the pressure grew that you can't just keep writing articles which will get your father transferred or your mother sent to Baramulla. You better do something which will make the world proud of you, or at least the family proud of you, or not be described as my grandfather. My nana described me as a jailbird because I had
Very
gone to
good.
Tihar and I was writing articles which were provoking people. So I decided to take the civil services exam,
Yeah.
and my uncle said, "Oh, after the interview was done, you should have told me MK Wali, who's a lieutenant governor of Delhi, was the chairman or one of the members of the Public Service Commission. You would have got very high. I would have ensured you got high marks in the interview." I'm revealing all this because this, in all candor, this is how it happened. But I did. I'm still idealistic, and I believe that if you want to be part of system, you play by the rules of the book. So I topped the police service at that stage, and I joined Karnataka cadre. And simultaneously, Jugalji, providentially, serendipitously, I got a scholarship to Oxford.
Oh,
Uh, this was Dharm Sankat. Here was a calling of my mother and my grandfather. The other was my calling of my father and my grandfather. Which one? But I just again took the road not taken, which is that I decided to go to Oxford. But Chidambaram was the home minister at that time, and one of his secretaries was a Kashmiri Pandit, and Kashmiri Pandits have played providentially a great line. Motilal Kaul, who
Motilal Kaur.
was yeah, he was, I think, additional chief secretary. He put up the file to Chidambaram saying that I should be given 2 years leave to go to Oxford without actually joining the service. So I went to Oxford, and then 2 years became 3 years, 3 years became 4 years, and then I left the service, did a PhD, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Is the history. No, that's so wonderful. You have been doing all productive things in, I mean, you're born in 62. I mean, you are even a year, 2 year younger to me. But I feel that whatever you have done in your this period of life. It is very admirable, and certainly it's very inspiring. It inspires all sects of people, and certainly I think we need to challenge the people, the ideas, everything. That's how this entire universe propels ahead. Amitabhji, first of all, I think let us come back to now this. I want first of all go to the larger picture, the landscape before I come to the Gang of Four. This Cold War
But
era.
Jugalji, I want to finally say, however, one thing which the one thing that differentiated me from my peers was that I was never afraid to take a stand and never afraid to offend. I
That's good.
remember because only then do people respect you. People think that people will respect you, those who become part of the herd, who can be shepherded. India is respected today because it has an independent voice. Once it becomes a satellite of the United States or any other country, it will never be respected. So I have always believed in the independence of my own agency. And in the context of Jammu and Kashmir, the independence of the agency means completely separated from the agencies that operate in Jammu and Kashmir. So I have always stood my ground. I remember as Vice Chancellor, uh, I was very, I had a very good relationship with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. So he asked me for my advice who should be the next governor after General Sinha, who was a remarkable governor, the best governor in recent years, the
No,
most misunderstood was, and I said NN Vora. He said the Congress party doesn't like him very much because he's written this report about criminalization of politics, and they think that it's not a very useful report. But I said this. Now I didn't realize that when I recommended NN Vora, he would be made governor. Of course, there must have been other considerations as well. But the first person he targeted in some ways was me. So, and I remember one administrative council meeting in which I was a member. I just, uh, there was a national conference MLA who was not particularly friendly towards me, who started speaking when I was speaking. And I
oh,
told the governor, I said, Governor, if you don't ask him to stop speaking or leave the room, I am leaving the room. He was the
wow.
chancellor. I was still the vice chancellor.
He was a chancellor.
Yeah. So he said, he told Mr. So and so, can you kindly stop speaking? He didn't stop speaking. I said, Mr. Chancellor, Your Excellency, you did not make him stop. So I'm walking out of the room.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
Uh, Similarly, whenever there's been whenever there has been a choice between self-respect, independence, and capitulating, I have chosen the path of resigning, whether it was the IPS or I resigned as a advisor, or I walked away from my relationship with Mr. Vora as governor, as chancellor, or numerous occasions. And this is my advice to young people: is realize that your true value will be in your integrity, in your
That's
independence. Once you become an instrument, no one will respect you. And that is, Jugalji, the greatest strength of DP Dhar, PN Haksar, TN Kaul, Ramji Kav, and PN Dhar. That they might have been advisors to Mrs. Gandhi, but they stood their own ground and they often
yeah,
gave advice which was not taken
the
without
truth is
fear or
that
without favor.
they were not
And that,
sycophants. Yeah, they were not
and it's not
sycophants. They were
you.
good
You're
laborers.
not. People say, "Oh, you should be born with a spine." Yes, anatomically, physiologically, you have to have a spine, but you can grow a spine. This
That's
is
true.
my use of a metaphor, a
That's so
social science
wonderful, so
metaphor.
wonderful, so
You can
every.
grow a
I think
spine.
this is a great byliner. I mean, our youngsters, especially who are watching this program, should take from Amitabhji, and I think the whole conversation till now which we had, it was almost extempo. And whatever he has said, each word, each line has something to be addressed to be looked into and to gain something from. Amitabhji, I would like to say where I mean, just in between intervention, where this Sitaramaya and our present foreign minister of the country and Shashi Tharoor or anybody, any prominent faces around you in the JNU when you were studying
They
there?
were all, they were all seniors. Madam Nirmala Sitharaman is someone who I greatly respect, who I know well. Jaishankar
Right.
was much senior. Minister Sitharaman was there when we were there in JNU. I would not describe her as a friend, but someone who is an associate who always responded to any call of distress which I have communicated to her on behalf of any of our colleagues. I know there was a uh, joint director of the intelligence bureau who was retiring. He, during COVID, wanted access to a hospital on which had a ventilator. I communicated this to Madam Sitaraman, and within minutes she had called me back, ensured that the Home Secretary acts with alacrity to ensure that that gentleman not only survives but today is now
Living.
living and also intervening in many debates. So that's one example. Similarly, with Dr. Jaishankar, I greatly respect him. I knew his father and I served in several committees together, Mr. K. Subramaniam, who was much elder, but he was like a Bhisham Pitame who taught us uh, about strategy and culture. Shashi Tharoor never went to JNU. I don't
He
know
was not
whether
involved.
it's JNU's misfortune, but Shashi Tharoor went from St. Stephen's College to, I think, Fletcher School of Diplomacy, and he finished his PhD on Indian foreign policy there. But
Oh,
certainly, Madam Sita Raman and Amitabh Kant is also someone who, again, is a remarkable person. He went to JNU. But the galaxy of people who won or who've been in JNU, including Nobel laureates. Abhijit Banerjee was a year senior to me
Abhijit
in
Banerjee.
economics, and he won the Nobel
Nobel
Prize in economic science. So there are outstanding people who have been in JNU and who have excelled on both sides of the political spectrum.
Okay. So let's come back. We'll come back to your this authorship and other aspects of your life later on. And I mean, let's come to the main this main theme of today's program. And let's first of all, before we begin to unravel, decipher these great personalities, great sons of the soil, great nationalists, and great people who loved the country, who were honest, who should have been the role models, and very few people remember them and know about them. I would like to just you, a person of your stature, your understanding, your deep insights. I want you to just give us a panorama, a canvas of that Cold War period, just a bit going back into the time from Nehru-Varian period when these all bureaucrats were in the lower positions, and what was this? What was how was the construct in that particular uncertain area and uncertain times when the country was very young and there was a resource crunch, and world economy was not either good, and USSR was perestroika and glasnost didn't have come, American arrogance was there. How was this whole backdrop? Then we'll begin to unravel the personalities, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, the Cold War began in 45 after the Second World War, which often happens that your allies against a common enemy, you fall apart once that common enemy goes away. They were allies, the United States and the Soviet Union, against fascism in Europe and against Japanese
Germany.
Japanese fascism in Asia. And while they had come together at that stage, later on they both were from different ideological camps and wanted a different world order. Now, India was newly independent, had just emerged after 150 or 200 years of colonialism, didn't want to get embattled in this Cold War rivalry.
Yes.
Nehru, when idealism was born as part of the freedom movement that the Congress had led, essentially they wanted to retain as I said, the independence of agencies, the ability to judge every issue on the merits of the case, and that was why you had the whole philosophy of non-alignment. Initially, both the US and the Soviet Union despised this policy. Eisenhower's Secretary of State John Foster Dulles called it an immoral policy. How can you sit on the fence when you have a battle between good and evil? Similarly, the communists, the Chinese called Nehru a running dog of imperialism. The Soviet Union itself was extremely wary and apprehensive. Stalin uh, wouldn't meet the Indian ambassador easily. He didn't meet Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. So there were the
It was
initial
the initial difficulties. They were caught between devil and the deep sea. And
yes.
then, I mean,
But Nehru retained the course, and so did Krishna Menon, who Krishna Menon is, of course, a figure of great hate in some circles today because they think that he was a Nehru's blind spot. But at that stage, there was a near consensus that we needed to retain an independence of agency. Remember that Nehru's first cabinet had virtually the whole spectrum of public opinion in there. You had Shama Prasad Mukherjee,
Rama
you
Prasad.
had Bhimrao Ambedkar. So you had all these great people in that cabinet, and at that stage, there was recognition that that to be a camp follower would be a very bad choice to make. In these circumstances, you had the policy of non-alignment, which was developed, which was articulated by Nehru, and as an independent country, you could probably make a greater difference in international relations because of the power of your own ideas, because you didn't have the material strength. So much so that at that stage, the New York Times used to say, when Nehru speaks, the world listens. You see, I'm an academic historian, so I don't brush away history. One of the strengths of being an academic is you look at history and put it in perspective. When I go back to politics, then I will take a more partisan view. At this moment, I'm giving you a clearly objective view of how the world was perceived. And in this, he found support, whether it was from the initial right wing opinion or left wing opinion. It was in the 50s, Jugalji, after Nehru had made mistakes on
Yes.
Kashmir, particularly, by taking it to
Chinese.
the United Nations, by not ensuring that the invaders are completely withdraw from what is today the LOC and withdraw from all of Jammu and Kashmir, and to accepting the ceasefire. But that was also Nehruvian idealism and the belief that the UN would be an impartial body which would not look at the issue of Kashmir through partisan Cold War spectacles.
That was too
Unfortunately,
noble. Too noble.
unfortunately,
Yeah. Yeah.
he realized that the Anglo Americans were conspiring because they saw Pakistan as a manageable ally in a strategic area. So they were conspiring against India. And that's the bottom line. At that stage, one of the great visits that happened. It's a visit that is often forgotten, but it's a defining visit of Indian foreign policy. And it's a visit which even today influences our relationship with Russia. And
Yes.
it is a visit that often still makes us take a generous view of Russian policies, including the war in Ukraine. That was a visit by Premier Bulgarin and Secretary General of the Communist Party, Nikolai Khrushchev.
Nicola. Yeah, I remember I had a discussion on one chapter. I'm a theater critic as well, and that was Yamburt. This Nadim Saab had played a opera there in the
If
Broadway
you
in
look
the.
at the correspondence of that visit, what happens is that Khrushchev has just embarked on a policy of de-Stalinization. He has given his great speech in the 20th CPSU meeting in 1953. He's denounced Stalin. And then he's trying to build a new policy of peaceful coexistence with the West. At that stage, they come to Kashmir. Nehru is himself monitoring the visit. You see the
Yes,
correspondence. Indira Gandhi is sent to ensure detailed arrangements. Nehru himself writes to Bakshi. In his correspondence, he says, "Dear, my dear Bakshi," and goes on to say, DP will be there to supervise all arrangements. I am sending Indira earlier. We have to ensure that you take good care of them. So every minute of Bulgarian and Khrushchev's visit is programmed, including how much vodka they would like during dinner. Because no Russian leader can live without fresh air, but cannot live without vodka. So
even at their branch rather.
yeah,
Not to
so
talk of dinner.
Dinanath Nadim, the genius of Dinanath Nadim comes alive through the performance of Bambar Yambasal and the
Yamburt.
genius of the music of Mohanlal Aima.
Mohanlal Ahmad Saab. Arey, wonderful, wonderful. And Pran
the
Kishore,
twin,
all were there. Pran
the
Kishore and all
Kashmiri
the great
Pandit genius at work was Mohanlal Aima and Dinanath Nadim, all leftists at that stage. Dinanath Nadim was a
socialists. It was
leftist.
fashionable also.
Ombar and Yamrazal were representation of the innocent Narcissus and the Tufan and
Yes.
the fight for that affections of that Narcissus. A
Actually,
metaphor for what was happening in the court.
Nadim had seen that play in the Chinese in a Chinese village, Chinese town, on which based he built this structure of this Bombarti Ambarzar. That was about some golden some
It
golden
was
girl. I don't remember. It was something like that.
I mean, I don't know the genealogy. All I know is that I mean there were very
But that was
few
a great event,
poets.
greatest event. And Nadim was he was an era man. He was an era man. He
I
was
mean,
a
but he
man.
was also a leftist. He got a Soviet award. I mean, he wrote poems like "Vushun Vushun Garam Garam Chukhoon Myon." I mean, as
Uh,
a reference to the revolutionary fervor of the young people of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, at that stage. And these people were mesmerized, including at that stage by Maharaja Dr. Karan Singh, who's the Sadr Riyasat.
Sadr Ilyas. He was a
In
Sadr
fact,
Ilyas.
in the internal correspondence which my friend who was an ambassador saw, they said we must call that young prince and his charming wife to Moscow. I don't think that Karan Singh and his wife traveled to Moscow at that stage, but this was
I mean,
written in the correspondence. So,
let's come to this
so
larger picture.
Bulganin and Khrushchev at that stage declared Jammu and Kashmir as an integral part of India. That was
Yes.
a defining moment. And in that phase, post that phase, was the emergence of what you described as the Gang of Four, who had their upbringing during the Nehruvian era, but found were blossomed during Mrs. Gandhi's era. You called them a Gang of Four. They're called more charitably, more generously,
Kashmir
Panj
Mafia.
Pyara.
Panch
Panj
Pyare.
Pyara from the holy tradition of the Khalsa, which
Yeah.
are, as you said, D.P. Dhar, Durga Prasad Dhar, Triloki Nath Kaul, Parmeshwari Nath Haksar, Prithvinath Dhar, and Ramji Nath Kaur.
Those are great people, great people. दो लोगों को तो मैं बहुत admire करता हूँ. Two people I really want to have complete study on them. That is Rameshwar Narayan Haksar and this Parameshwar Narayan Haksar and Rameshwar Nath this cow. Anyway, let's begin with one by one. If you
Yeah, I
permit
will.
this,
Let's
we'll just
begin with
begin
all
with
of them.
Rameshwar Narayan Haksar, the chief strategist. Let's decipher, let's unravel his personality, his methodology. As we say that they were not there just because they were Kashmiris. They were there.
Parmeshwar Nath Haksar was the real intellectual amongst them all.
Yeah.
He was born UP Kashmiri. He's called upstairs Kashmiri as the. He was not
Gujranwala.
born. And
He was born in Gujranwala, but he was taught in Allahabad. He studied in
yeah,
Allahabad.
he didn't know how to speak Kashmiri, but he was a good chef. He in fact once when I met him, he told me, "I'll let me share with you a recipe of how to make mats."
Arey, what?
And he said, "Do you know what? How does mats? And you have to ensure that it actually stays intact." And he said, "Only through the white of an egg." Is the jelly added so that the mats doesn't collapse when you're cooking it. So he had these fine points of even about cooking, but he was a great Sanskritist as well. He had a
Yeah.
great understanding of history, and he had studied under Harold Lasky at the London School of Economics, and then picked up by Nehru and joined the Foreign Service, and until he became part of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's cabinet. He was truly the most cerebral of all these five Kashmiri Pandits. I knew him when he was Chancellor of JNU. I met with him when his eyesight was fading, but a remarkable, thoughtful statesman. To the point that when Rajiv Gandhi wanted to make an opening to China, there was only one person who he trusted. It was Parmeshwar Haksar. He sent P.N. Haksar to China to try and make that opening. When Sonia Gandhi was in a dilemma about who she should make prime minister if she didn't become prime minister, and when she finally chose Manmohan Singh, Natwar Singh was deputed to ask Babu Bhai, as he was called, Babu Bhai, who should be prime minister. And Babu Bhai at that stage said S.D. Sharma, because at that stage, Babu Bhai also believed that only uh, perhaps perhaps that was his only narrow quality, but that only Brahmins can govern without self-interest at that stage. So he said Shankar Dayal Sharma, but Shankar Dayal Sharma said he's too old and feeble, and so they finally settled for Manmohan Singh. Uh, so he was the principal secretary, the most powerful principal secretary uh, in the history of independent India, till the
Amitabh,
time that we read.
I would like to you go forth slightly. I mean, go just move back into this. I would like to say that Indira Gandhi had, because she was, when she came into became a prime minister, she personally had written a letter to P.N. Huxer to guide her and be with her as her secretary and later principal secretary. Tell us something about that also. Yeah,
You see, because as I said, Babu Bhai had established a reputation for being a very sharp, incisive thinker. Of course, he came from he had no shortage of income. His family owned that shop in Connaught Place, which sold furnishings, called the Pandit Brothers,
Pandit Brothers,
which was on a
Chacha ji. Yeah,
which was an extremely well-known shop, which was a flourishing business. So he had an interest in that. So he was not short of money. He had two daughters, and Mrs. Gandhi had a natural affinity towards Kashmiri Brahmanical intellect, and Haksha Sahib had attracted her attention, as he had attracted public attention by his writings, by his speeches, and by also his integrity, and more importantly, by his ability to retain confidences. Once when I asked him about a couple of questions, he says, "Young man, I am not like Henry Kissinger. I do not kiss and tell. So I'm not going to reveal to you confidences." So he never left a personal memoir in that set. Of course, like all great men, he used to surround himself with often people of lesser intellect because of not the same degree of institutional leadership or thoughtfulness. He created an institution in Chandigarh called CRID, which was his everlasting contribution to institution building. But Haksha Sahib was, as I said, his cigars and his pipes, and he used to smoke till almost his last
silence.
day.
Yes.
Uh, were remarkable, but also extremely driven by socialist policies. What all of them had in common, except Ramji Kao, whose politics I don't really know, was they were really drawn to the leftist cause. So many of the socialist policies that we look back upon and say, ye kyun kiya? Nationalization of banks, getting rid of the privy purses, of course, is something that you can easily justify. But nationalization of banks or some of the socialist takeover of companies, or the interventions in the market which were made, which were often counterproductive, as time showed, they owed a great deal to P.N. Hux's advice at that stage. And Mrs. Gandhi was, of course, politically extremely shrewd, but intellectually she was, I mean, she didn't have the scholarship or the wisdom of
That level.
Huxley. I mean, she could speak French. She had been to the Sorbonne and spent time at the Somerville College, Oxford. But uh, to be Lasky's student and to be Lasky's favorite student is uh,
Different.
is a different thing. And Lasky used to say, if you're not a socialist when you're 20, then you don't have a heart. But if you're not a capitalist when you're 40, then you don't have a head.
Oh, well.
Unfortunately, Haksha Saab retained his heart till the last, which means he remained a quasi-socialist or socialist till almost the
Because
last.
Amitabh ji, I just a minute. I am not a very expert in this domain, but certainly I would like to say, I think this socialism imbibed inheritedly in that political system which was imbibed by Jawaharlal Nehru. But I think wasn't P.N. Huxer a very pragmatist politician? He could go, as you rightly said, you quoted that head and heart, this adage. So I mean, he is a person who was instrumental in bringing up the economic reforms, bringing up P.V. Narasimha Rao back to the center stage. It is he who understood this ad hocism and this social. There was slightly deflection from this basic concept of socialism to go continuously I mean, in continuum, going in continuum in the same pace of economic growth and economic understanding and socialistic segregation.
Yeah, but too little, too late. I mean, when that dawn of wisdom came to most people, it was in the 1990s when India's economy was almost bankrupt, when we were mortgaged to various external agencies, where we had no choice but to liberalize within and open our economy to the outside world. But all through the 50s and 60s, of course, uh, uh, the initial thrust was on central planning, and that could have continued. But through takeover of profit making enterprises and getting them run by public sector bureaucrats, resulted that your rate of growth, and this is just one example, one trivial example, was what was described as a Hindu rate of growth, which is about 2%. Uh, because you didn't let the entrepreneurial spirit of the Indian people flourish. You thwarted that. I mean, it's like the thing if I say Jugal Kishorji is doing a fantastic program, let's give Sheetal Nath to All India Radio, to a bureaucrat who will run your program. He'll neither have the passion nor any incentive. He'll just see whether he follows some rule book which will tick all the and he'll tick all the boxes. You do it because there's passion, there's spirit, and businessmen do it because there's profit. If you're going to get a salary and your tenure is guaranteed, what is the incentive for you to really perform? That's my biggest problem with the bureaucracy. Of course, now Prime Minister Modi has intervened. There's a 360 performance reviews, and it's good because people used to take entry level officers used to take everything for granted. Now you have 360 often done by private consultancies which look at a view of the officer not just from your superiors but from your peers, from your potential stakeholders, including your subordinates. That 360 view is essential. But a socialism, whether it was in Russia or the Soviet Union or India, was this kind of corporatization, and was not the what had happened was that there was a takeover by the state of almost everything that mattered, including look at Air India. I mean, even
Yes.
the Tatas have not been able to improve it still, given the bad state. But one stage, JRD, this was a flagship company making profits.
Yes, that's true. I mean, let's talk about something more about, in case you want to close it down, or let's talk something more about this Haksar Saab. Anything else you want to add on Haksar Saab's personality? You talked about his elegance, his immaculate dressing, his pipe, and his being a master strategist, and his understanding the socialistic bloc. And I heard that he had a rank of that of a cabinet minister. Even ministers used to stand up
Yeah,
while
yeah,
remain standing up, while he was such a tall personality. Yeah.
I mean, and all of them knew how to use power, and because you put someone in a position where you don't know how to use the instrumentalities of power, you'll be a complete failure. P.N. Haksar, as secretary in the PMO, was able to leverage his position to ensure that critical decisions are made along the lines that he had suggested. And to get bureaucrats, get politicians of different hue and from different parts of the political spectrum to agree to policies is not easy. But P.N. Haksar had the cerebral vision, but also the political acumen to be able to do that. Um,
Command.
and and also because he was also deeply rooted in a what you might call a Hindu view of life. Beyond a point, there wasn't any personal ambition. So he
Yes.
just quietly went into the good night.
He was
He
deep into
didn't
the.
fight against the raging of the light, which was reflected in the past struggles that were happening. When he got into a confrontation with Sanjay Gandhi um, uh, just before the emergency, he just quietly walked away because he didn't want to be caught in that situation of a mother's battle for or give Indira Gandhi that dharam sankat of choosing between a son's affections and the advice of her most favored advisor. So he walked away. But the respect continued to the point where even Sonia Gandhi, as I pointed out, consulted him. Rajiv Gandhi consulted him. Babu Bhai was a
Babu.
wisdom, was a kind of a sage uh, of a Sant Vihar who would sit there. People would come and seek advice, and he would give them. So he would, in his quiet retirement, still exercise power, but benignly, without actually controlling power.
Benign. And I sometimes, but somewhere down the line, I also feel as a onlooker, as a normal common reader, that what happened with such a great giant intellectual, that in the Shimla agreement he came to the rescue of whatever agreement was done between Mrs. Gandhi and Mr. Bhutto, and he came and he played a pivotal role in pacifying the bureaucracy, as the Manik Shah said that they had made they made monkey out of her. So, I mean, he came in defense to that. I mean, an ideologue, an intelligentsia of his level who understood country, who was a loyalist and nationalist. I mean, how could he go to that extent in defending this? Or either he was a part of it, I don't know.
It's a very interesting episode. I mean, lots and lots of people write on it, and of course, we are all 2020 by hindsight. But one of the things that people often say, when you historians warn you as your first year student in Oxford, you're warned against the counterfactual. What if, what if Babu Bhai hadn't existed? Would Simla have existed the way it did? It's a very dangerous question because you can never recreate the conditions that prevailed at that time. What is clear is that there had been pre-negotiations between DP Dhar, DP Saab, and Aziz Ahmed Khan in Murray. Uh,
Maria.
After the war, after this instrument of surrender and the ceasefire, so Aziz Ahmed Khan and DP Saab went and met in Murray, which was a hill station in the Punjab in Pakistan, and negotiated the terms of what would be a settlement. When Bhutto went with Benazir to Simla, of course, remarkable thing is again Mrs. Gandhi, like the Bulgarian Khrushchev, think supervised arrangements in what is today the Institute of Advanced Studies, but what was the Viceregal Lodge, to the details of what would be kept in each bedroom, how the food would be served. And of course, Bhutto also liked his drink, so I'm sure they must have taken measures to ensure that he is not, uh, he doesn't go thirsty. So, but there was a logjam which happens. Bhutto is unwilling to bend. Uh, because what the Indian position is that now J&K is settled, and at Simla, if my memory is right, what India was pressing for was that the present LOC, or what was still Simla, the ceasefire line, become the international border. In other words, what is yours, Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, and perhaps the northern areas as well, would remain yours, and what is in our control, which is the valley, Jammu, Ladakh, would be ours. That was the international border, and finished. Bhutto made the argument that he comes from a defeated nation which has just lost a war. If he goes back, he'll be politically so weak that he'll be disposed of. And do they really want a leader who cannot sell an agreement to his people?
Oh,
DP Saab falls ill at that period. He has a heart
in
issue.
a heart trouble, yeah.
Uh, TN Call firmly opposes any change on the bottom line of India, that if you want the prisoners of war, and there are several 100,000 Pakistani prisoners of war, or
90,000.
if you want a withdrawal of Indian forces in the western sector, then accept the fact that J&K is settled forever. There, the final on the eve of the final day, it seems that there is no agreement, and Bhutto and Benazir are planning to travel back without an agreement. Haksar Saab then, sometimes academics, sometimes people who are so cerebral, so intelligent, so foresighted, can perhaps get it wrong, or perhaps that was the right approach in those
Moment at that
circumstances.
time.
Yes. he quotes from the treaty of quotes from the First World War. He said, after the First World War, there was a Treaty of Versailles, which Germany signed. That was as a defeated power, and
Amitabhji,
they imposed.
just for intervention, I think you may not be going closer to the wire. Sometimes this voice gets interrupted. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
slightly,
they
slightly.
said that you're if you're going to Germany was conditions were imposed in Germany, reparations were imposed in Germany, with the
Correct.
result that led to the rise of fascism in Germany and the Second World War. So the seeds of the Second World War were laid in the First World War or the Treaty of Versailles. And if we send Bhutto back without an agreement from a defeated nation, or if we impose conditions on him of such a nature that he will have seen be seen as having come back after having lost in Simla, what will be the utility? One, it will give rise to or strengthen extremist tendencies in Pakistan. It will also weaken Bhutto. So perhaps be generous to him and say that this will be settled bilaterally, that this is no longer an international issue, but privately make him commit to the fact that he will prepare his people for the eventual settlement on the basis of the status quo.
Oh,
The
that's.
fact
I,
is that all the West, including P. N. Dhar's autobiography, that Bhutto had privately agreed to accept the status quo as the international border,
national border.
and thereafter reneged on that understanding. And Mrs. Gandhi offered him this space saver at the advice of Babu Bhai. So P.N. Haksar is often presented as the villain who took this long-term view or cited historical examples, while T.N. Kaul was openly hostile. Ramji Kao, I doubt whether he had a
Ambika was at
he,
the backdrop. He was at the
yeah, he
backdrop.
probably was bugging Bhutto's room at that stage,
Bugging.
and uh, P.N. Dhar was probably too small a fry even then to
PN.
have a decisive.
Mandate on that. Anyway, let's go. Let's move forward. I mean, time is just moving ahead. Let's go. I would like to have a quote I just noted in the morning. It's about Alexander Merenchis, the French chief of intelligence chief, who had written in 1970 about Ramji Kao, Rameshwar Nath Kao. What a fascinating mix of physical and mental elegance. What an accomplishment. What a friendship. And yet so shy of talking about himself, his accomplishments, and his friends. Let's talk about Aaron Cow, the first who's known by his deadpan face, that one
Yeah.
photograph, and he is known as a cowboy, and he had done, I mean, so many wonderful job for this country, made the first research and analyzing wing to exist, and then the Sikkim plan and the Bangladesh Mukti Wahani and all those things. Let's unravel this great man, Ramji Kao, one of my
I think
favorite personality. Yeah.
yeah, he was a absolutely fantastic spy chief, who is lionized and done so deservedly. He was born. I mean, he was part of the intelligence bureau from the Indian Police Service. I think maybe he was part of the Imperial Police Service and then the Indian Police Service. But there was only one bureau, which was the Intelligence Bureau. But along the way, there was a realization that you needed a division between external intelligence and internal intelligence. And like you have the CIA and the FBI, or the MI5 or the MI6. So uh, Ramji Ka was entrusted by Mrs. Gandhi to set up all three. The two accounts that everyone should read is one, of course, B. Raman, who was worked under uh, Ramji Kav, called Cows, KO boys, as
Cow.
people who were recruited by him to set up that agency. And then there's a Nitin Gokhale or biography of Ramji Kav, with a preface written by Ajit Doval, the present NSA. So Ramji Kaus set up a new organization, taking help from other external agencies as well. But the great successes were, of course, one, two or three. Let me just identify two major successes,
Second,
three successes. One was, of course, Bangladesh.
Bangladesh.
You had a huge refugee crisis. You had an internal insurgency within Bangladesh, but the Mukti Bahani, which was which needed arms, which needed training, was provided training by RNW. And RNW helped train this cadre of the Mukti Bahini, which, together with the Indian Army, defeated the Pakistan Army. And that famous picture of Jagjit Singh Arora signing the instrument of surrender given by Abdul
Niazi.
Khan Niazi,
Niazi sir.
that's a famous picture. But Ramji Kao planned, executed that vision. Sam Bahadur is running in the cinemas from today
Samba.
onwards, but someone should make a movie on R.N. Kao as well. Because
Yes,
if Sam Bahadur was responsible for the fall of Dhaka and the victory of India over Pakistan in that war, Ramji Kao was the back channel, the backstory, which should be equally lionized. The
foundation.
second is the second was, of course, the annexation of Sikkim. Again, the Chogyal of Sikkim and his American wife, Hope Cook, who he'd
American
married
wife.
this
Yes.
American socialite Hope Cook, who was seen as a CIA agent.
Yes.
And suddenly, Chogyal, under the influences of his CIA Democratic CIA wife, who had greater believers in republicanism and democracy, wanted Sikkim to uh, perhaps exercise its own identity to the point of sovereignty, a real sovereignty, and a place in the United Nations. At that stage, Ramji Kao helped in creating the conditions why when Kazi Lendup Dorji and others were able to mount a challenge to the Chogyal. And there was a plebiscite in Sikkim which accepted the Indian sovereignty over Sikkim, that they wanted a merger with India. So
Complete.
RNW
Complete.
played a key role. This is the other. If Bangladesh represents one of the few instances in the Cold War before the 90s where a state was separated, where another state, because in the Cold War, the status quo remained through much of the Cold War till 1990. Sikkim was another instance of where you actually annexed a country or annexed another state, and there's not a single voice of disquiet till today. It is a merger which is
Complete.
so peaceful, so calm, and there is not even a merger of, or not even a whisper of secessionism within Sikkim. So these are two great instances where Ramji Kao had a great say. Similarly, in terms of the Pokhran nuclear explosion number one, Pokhran 1, to ensure its complete secrecy, to ensure that the Americans who were constantly snooping around don't become aware that our peaceful nuclear test is about to take place or until it takes place, was again a responsibility that RNW, together with the Intelligence Bureau, performed exceedingly well. Of course, RNW at that stage, uh, uh, also because Ramji Kao had to build a new cadre and you couldn't recruit officers easily, so it came to be known as relatives and wives organization, because there were lots of Kashmiri Pandits who got laterally deputed to the RNW. And of course, the first quality and the most important quality of any service, especially intelligence service, is you have to have the brains, you have to have the loyalty, and you should be able to keep confidences. So all the people that he recruited were people of tremendous
Great
integrity,
integrity.
intelligence, and aptitude. So while some people criticize him, the general opinion is that Ramji Kao was an
Oh,
exemplary spy chief, and
exemplary.
unlike everyone else, he never told what he did
His story.
later on. He also quietly retired into Vasant Vihar, which is also where he lived quietly, without people who would come to him for advice. He would give it, never disclose anything,
And
because your
even
ability
it is
to
said
bury secrets is the important thing in life.
It is said that Dalai Lama once he was in a function, public function, he shied away from the public appearances, and when Dalai Lama once recognized him, Mr. Cow, and just within a few seconds after that, he disappeared into the crowd. He was very shy. He was a comfortable at his own desk. Even Mr. Sood, who was the chief of intelligence, I don't know his full name, he
Vikram
recently,
Sood.
huh? Vikram Sood, sir.
Vikram.
Vikram Sood. He said that nobody among us, nobody can look up to the stature of Ramji Kao. He said that once I was being told when I had to approach him, and I was being told that don't put your hands on the table, because he would not like that a spy puts a hand on the table and fingerprints are there by they are being used by the other. There's one more incident, Amitabhji. Probably you can throw a light on that. Something happened in Nehru's time also. He got his first assignment when Chuan Lai had to visit India or some place, and there was a kind of a rumor that that airplane is to be blasted and bombarded, something like that. And that assignment was given by Nehru to the Ramji Kao, and Ramji Kao did it very, very skillfully.
Yes.
He was at the beginning of his career.
This
But the
was when he
great
was
man,
in the Intelligence Bureau. That's what when he was in the Intelligence Bureau before RNW was formed.
before REW as well. So great man, a man who never took a credit, and he is a hero. These are the real heroes. I mean, there are many, but they are unsung heroes, of course, especially Ramji Kao, Rameshwar Nath, Narayan Haksar. So let's come down to third person whom Americans hated the most, and later on he made friendship with Henry Kissinger, that is Trilokinath Kaul, a Baramulla born native of Kashmir, the ICS, first Kashmiri ICS, and his rise to the power and his development, his methodology for serving his country and the nation and probably the prime ministers of those times.
Jugalji, I had a query, which means that I have an unlimited ability to speak, and you have an unlimited ability to generate a conversation. But I'm not sure whether the audience is prepared for this to be a.
Audiences, I mean, all the people are very much engaged. There are
I thought
great.
maybe you could another. You want to carry it in a second part, because this can continue till the early dawns of early morning. So I think maybe we
No,
should.
no,
I mean, depends on you.
we can do it for. I mean, just by our standards, we can carry it up to 9 o'clock, at least half an hour more, if possible, for you.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Um, I knew that this would be an expansive conversation, so I kept my uh, calendar completely free uh,
Thank you very
uh,
much.
for speaking at length. Um, um, but TN Call, absolutely brilliant, remarkable uh, officer, charismatic to the core. He was, just for a slight correction, he was the only Kashmiri speaking, Kashmir born ICS officer. Uh, so there were other ICS officers from the plains who had joined the Indian civil service, but they were neither Kashmiri speaking nor were they born in Kashmir. Trilokinath Kaul was the only one, and was from Jogi Lankar Ranavari, which was close to where our ancestral family lived as well. Uh, and he joined the civil service, and then initially he was part of the administrative service. I think he served in the United Provinces and UP, in Unnao, for instance. I think either as a district collector or a subdivisional magistrate. So he served the initial period knowing the hurly-burly of Indian politics, and thereafter, of course, he joined the foreign service. The interesting fact is that he was this is an interesting anecdotal. I think he was posted in China or in his initial days, and he wanted to marry China or Moscow. He wanted to marry the interpreter in the embassy. Uh,
Oh yes, yes, I have heard about that.
anyway, the correspondence says Nehru told. So, and he wanted to leave the service. This is in the initial days. But look at the broad-mindedness of Nehru at that stage as well, and of the system. He says just because he's having an affair with a Chinese interpreter or a Russian interpreter doesn't mean he has to leave the service. So he call him back. So he came back. But I mean, there was a certain generosity of spirit with which you approach these things. that to err is human.
To others.
I mean, you can only be divine if you have no frailty in life. So,
What
but
is it?
TN
प्यार
Call,
किया तो डरना क्या? प्यार किया तो डरना क्या? उसमें क्या फर्क पड़ता है? Anyway.
and in some ways, if you witness, and that's a quality greatly admirable in Captain Amrinder Singh, who doesn't disguise his affection, but that's what separates men from the boys, the statesmen from the younger crowd, which often thinks that to appear to be hypocritically puritanical somehow will win the public
Return.
accolades. So TN Call, however, Nehru's decision was the right decision. TN Call demonstrated tremendous intellect, was able to capture the affections of then Soviet Union, had a relationship with many of the members of the Politburo, uh, and became foreign secretary for a long
It
time
is
and continued to
it is
be a
it is said it is said that Nehru snubbed him once as he was trying to. Nehru was that time pro-China, and he tried to as he was trying to gravitate him towards USSR, and then the punch shield. And later on, the punch shield that embargo happened, and Nehru came to realize that how vital was his support, information, and the guidance for this tilting towards the USSR. Yeah,
So, I mean, I have had the pleasure of meeting both P and Haq. I have not had the privilege or the pleasure of meeting Ramji Nath Kao, but I have had the great pleasure of having many conversations with Haq Sahab and TN Call, because again, there's a distant family connection which connects us. So I've had conversations with him as well. He was also remarkably grand in his style, uh, and a larger than life personality, and his imprint on foreign policy was so strong that they said that in foreign policy what matters is uh, uh, only three things matter. This is a paraphrase of something else. They said protocol, alcohol, and TN call. Indian foreign policy is built on only three things: protocol,
protocol,
TN
alcohol.
call, and alcohol. So you maintain the protocol, you serve everyone with a good spirit, but then you have the wisdom and the elegance and the larger than life personality of Trilokanath Kaur.
Tiki Bai. He was known as Tiki Boy also. Tiki Bai,
Tiki
Tika Bai.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Nehru addressed them as him as Tiki, DP Saab as DP. Uh, Tiki, he said, call Tiki back. I mean, he can't just leave the service just because he's having an affair with some interpreter. So he became foreign secretary and was foreign secretary during the most critical periods of Indian foreign policy, including, as you said, the Simla Agreement. But later on, he served as ambassador to the Soviet Union and ambassador to the United States. And obviously, he again was trained in the idiom of socialism, and he had seen how the Americans operate. I mean, see, the point is that the penetration of Americans was sometimes so crude in terms of their espionage, their surveillance, that it put you off. um,
Yeah,
uh, and they wanted you to be satellites. They wanted you to be junior partners, which India, through its civilizational strengths, through
never
its
accept.
whole, will never accept. The
Will
Soviet
never
Union,
accept.
in contrast, realized that you can't treat India as a Hungary, or neither as a part of the Warsaw Pact countries, nor as a kind of loose ally, because India is too self-respecting a country. So
Self-respect.
you can't take India for granted, to the point that even on Afghanistan, India made its point clear. Yes, we should have been more forceful, perhaps, in opposing the Soviet war in Afghanistan. But we made it clear, and Brijesh Mishra made it clear in the United Nations during Mrs. Gandhi's period. So the Soviets realized that, so to dealt with India with greater nuance. Not that they were more broad-minded, but they had understood India's sentiment, its mindset, perhaps, and was able to capture the mindset of an elite, which obviously was drawn to, as you said, if you don't have a heart, you'll not be driven to socialism. The fact that you're facing so much deprivation, that you're that a certain Gandhian sense of simplicity, non-consumerism drives you, or attracts you towards, at least symbolically, to all the instruments of socialism. You want a more egalitarian society. You want there to be less poverty. Um, so capitalism was not a kind of dominant tendency even when I was growing up. It didn't you didn't exhibit your wealth. Uh, you didn't have these Bollywood weddings being the ultimate aspiration of every middle class family.
Yes, that
Uh,
was not.
uh, I mean, you did not in a middle class Kashmiri Pandit family. You did not exhibit that you had all this wealth. It was enough. You were far more muted. Even if you came from a wealthy landed family, you were muted in terms of the expressions of your richness. Your richness was measured in terms of your scholarship, in terms of your ideas. So,
Yes,
TN Call, like DP and Haksas Hub, were driven towards, was drawn to the Soviet Union. He was perhaps the closest in terms of affinity to the Soviet Union, and he played a great role along with DP Saab in the finalization of the Indo-Soviet Treaty of 71.
yes, yes.
And he served as foreign secretary, but as I said, he continued as an informal advisor. The great thing about this is many of them continued as informal advisors to the powers that be. Haksar Saab, Tiki Bhai, Tiki Bhai could walk into Mrs. Gandhi's office even when he had stopped having any official position and he had retired to his orchard in Rajgarh in Himachal Pradesh. He had a lovely cottage in Pahalgam also at one stage, I think.
Mm. Yes, 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 well, yes.
Yes. So, I mean,
So,
I think, and he wrote a large number of books. Many of them are immensely readable. In fact, apart from Haksar Saab, who wrote some books, T.N. Call has been the most prolific. D.P. Saab didn't write a book. I wish there was an autobiography of his which had emerged. He was the most, T.N. Call, Tiki Bhai was probably the most colorful personality of them all, but then you'll have to speak to people who know him better. To see the multifaceted characteristics of Tiki Bhai, but generous to a fault. I mean, I think his family, his friends, all benefited from his patronage.
that's true. That's true. Tiki Bai, I've heard stories from many people. Certainly, there are a number of narratives, and you yourself have been very, as you said, that you have been acquainted with Tiki Bai as well as P. N. Haksar. So you are very fortunate enough to have an interaction with such personalities, and certainly you might have gained something from their wisdom with the years. So let's move on because there's a paucity of time. We could have go on Tiki Bai only. It's a very very big chapter. So let's go to not PN. We'll go to DP there. DP there. After DP there, we'll go to PN there, sir.
I think DP Saab was someone who was the probably the most political of them all. He was also the most charismatic of them all. He had uh, studied in Kashmir, but then had become president of the Students' Union in Lucknow, and then become a home minister at the age of before he was 30, home minister in the state government. And his charisma was unparalleled. I know many stories of DP Saab from Mufti Saab, whose advisor I served for a short while. And he would describe him as DPO's Kalandar.
DP was
Uh,
Kalandar.
Kalandar, meaning he's like a mystical giant. He says, don't reduce him to. He says, people used to say, oh, uh, uh, DP Saab drinks too much. He says, that's all baloney. We would just converse. We would recite Ghalib, Iqbal, poetry, talk about politics. And at the end of the evening, he used to live in a very small house when he was part of the Democratic National Conference, which was a rebellion against Bakshi and his government. He says that he used to live in a small house in Jawahar Nagar, and at the end of the evening, when it was early morning, Sarvanand, their fantastic cook, would cook a Rogan Josh, and Mufti would tell me, Amitabh, I'll believe you're a real Kashmiri Pandit if you can have a Rogan Josh made of the same quality that Sarvanand used to make in DP Saab's house in circa 1964. So I failed in my attempts at creating the Rogan Josh. Perhaps, Jugalji, you can find a recipe of that Rogan Josh which we can together cook one day. But
Sure.
DP was also as I said, he was also, in the best sense of the word, uh, a master strategist, a political figure who understood power in its most Machiavellian sense and in its most saintly sense. If you ask, and you should interview Dr. Karan Singh, he'll say uh, the uh, uh, the initial decision, or the the plan to dismiss Sheikh Abdullah, including the drafting of that letter which Dr. Karan Singh drafted to Sheikh Abdullah, which was communicated to him in Gulmarg in 1953, when L.D. Thakur and Ghulam Qadir Gandarbali knock on Sheikh Abdullah's door and say, "You have been dismissed as Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir." He says,
Right.
"Who dismissed me?" And he says, "This has come from the Sadr Riyasat, Dr. Karan Singh." He says, "That chit of a boy, I appointed him as Sadr Riyasat." But the chit of the boy had actually drafted it on the advice and on the drafting. Well, much of the drafting was done by DP Saab. DP Saab was a confidant of Nehru. Each letter that I see of Bakshi or many of the Kashmir policy, he says DP has informed us. During the Moe Mukaddas thing, again, it is BN Malik keeps referring to DP Saab's Machiavellian strategic elements. PN Haq sir later on used to say, there's, in terms of ground level electoral understanding of politics, there's no one better in Jammu and Kashmir than DP Saab.
Yes. So,
Oh, he also had the
even it
benefit
is
of.
mentioned, even it is mentioned in Karan Singh's book autobiography I read very recently. He has mentioned about this episode you were mentioning just the same
Yeah.
chronology. Yeah.
You see, and also DP Saab was someone who was truly bilingual. As I mean, he'd won the president of the Students' Union elections in Lucknow University. He could speak Urdu. He had Ghalib, Iqbal. He could speak English, and he was, by all accounts, my father, who rarely praises people for their handsomeness, because he thinks there's no one handsomer than my father himself. Says the only person who was the most handsome person I have met was DP Dhar. So he compares him to everyone. He says there was no, in terms of his personality, persona, in terms of his ability to articulate. I didn't have much to do with him. I know that occasionally he would visit our house to see my grandfather, and there would be a kind of pin drop silence and awe and overwhelming sense of apprehension and joy that DP Saab was visiting us. He was called by my grandmother or by Nan Saab, and they say, "Oh, he's come." And he would just sit for 2 minutes. He maintained a cordial, a critical distance cordiality, but he was a much. I mean, he was a figure who can serve as an inspiration. Of course, uh, Kashmiri Pandit. The interesting thing about all the Kashmiri Pandits that you refer to, you might go back to the saying "Panyancha Pagambar
Padamshri
Moinmit."
Prof.Amitabh
So no, none of these figures is probably a profit to the community, but that's true about any community with the kind of collective intelligence that the Kashmiri Pandits have shown.
And I have seen.
So,
I also heard when Vijay Dar was on my show, he said that his wife was known as Rani Babi. Rani Babi. Rani Babi rather. Rani Babi was their house was always open to any guest. Anybody could walk into their home and have the meals and talk over and then leave at his liberty. So that was such was his magnanimity and
he was
generosity.
a very extremely charismatic person who is again unsung, because uh, the women. What I would encourage you to do is also speak to. I mean, you have already spoken to my mother, but also there is this academic who says, "Can the subalterns speak? Can the women of Kashmir speak?" You should bring out one episode on, or several episodes on the women. Mahmood Ali Shah, Begum Abdullah, all these formidable women, Khemlata Wakluji, all these formidable women who had a voice of their own. And in that, Behenji or Rani Bhabi is someone who had a quiet charisma, who, amongst all her children, in some ways, amongst all his children, my grandfather's qualities of generosity of heart and character were imbued in
Grained in
Mrs.
there.
Dhar. Totally. I mean, she was my my aunt, for the purposes of this show, just to ensure that, so just to tell you that there is that conflict of interest when I describe her in terms which I think are strictly objective, but there is obviously a great deal of affection that I have for her.
That's so wonderful. And I don't know, I know very little about P.N. Dar Saab. P.N. Dar was an economist. He was the founder of Delhi School of Economics, and then he became the principal secretary. Anything you would like to brief us about P.N. Dar Saab and his
I had
being part
his,
of
I had, the, good- I had the good fortune of having his grandson as my research assistant,
right, sir?
and he was someone who I gained a insight from in Ishan, and Ishan gave me a deep insight into Prithinath Dhar's life. He was a top economist. He was also a path-breaking socially as well. He was he came from a family of Hakim, so he was known as
Doctor.
Prithinath Dhar Hakim. Uh, he had married once in Kashmir, but then married a Mathur, a very, very well respected family in Delhi. So he has that in common because I am also married to a Mathur, and who was a fantastic singer.
Oh,
And but he was a brilliant economist, and he wrote one of the defining economic policy papers for Mrs. Gandhi, which Mrs. Gandhi got attracted to P.N. Dhar's ideas uh, when she read that book. In again, of course, he is somehow you could see him as a kind of patron of Manmohan Singh. He got the Padma
yes.
Vibhushan when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was uh, 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 was Prime Minister. So, but later years, P.N. also wanted to engage in trying to bring peace in Jammu and Kashmir, and his book, The Burden of Democracy, Indira Gandhi, I mean, I forget the exact title, is an extremely readable one and it's primary source material. But Ishan and I always used to quarrel about his private papers, which I think should be produced in the form of a book. He's promised to do that.
He should.
Uh, he should, as should Mr. Vijay Dharji. Gumarji should do it with DP Saab's papers because you capture the oral part of the archives, but there's a great also sensibility
Written.
in what's been written, what's been documented, and we need a biography of each one of these. Perhaps you can take up that task, Jugalji, as a major researcher. You should have a cadre of researchers under you and guide them to write biographies of these great
That would
men.
be that would be a great challenge.
Absolutely. And as I said, there is a book written by Sheila Bahadur Dhar, who was a personality in her own right and who guided her husband, P.N. Dhar, because P.N. Dhar was a self made man who came from Kashmir, but she was a kind of uh, person who lent
Inspiration.
those subtle graces, who lent that elegance to P.N. Dhar's raw personality, which must have just come from Kashmir.
If I'm not wrong, Amitabh ji, this is a very elegant picture of P.N. Haksar and P.N. Dar side by Mrs.
That's
Gandhi
right.
in the center.
Yes. Yes. Babu Bhai,
That
Prat Hakim, and Mrs. G.
oh, that's so wonderful. That's so good, so graceful picture.
In
P.N.
fact,
Dar.
yeah, absolutely. He's as I said, all of them were graceful to a fault, gracious to a fault, I might add, and also people who took a larger view of India and its interests, never bigoted, never
Compromise.
narrow. In some ways, they have the similar, even though they were happily married, but they had a similar view of the national interest as the prime minister, which is a selfless view of the larger interests of India.
I won't be talking about B.K. Nehru because B.K. Nehru was never thought to be the Gang of Four. But if, in case you want to brief a line or so on B.K. Nehru, that would be very nice.
I mean, BK Nehru was not part of the Panch Pyaras, as they say, but BK Nehru was a cousin of Mrs. Gandhi, and in fact, he served as ambassador to the United States. He was part of the ICS, and then he served as governor to Gujarat. But his the most remarkable period of his life, I think, or public life, was when he was governor of Jammu and Kashmir. And
Yes.
his book, for all those who care about biographies, Nice Guys Finish Second is a
Again,
book worth reading for everyone interested in Kashmir, including the chapters on what was happening in Kashmir politics and how he resisted Mrs. Gandhi's pressure on his wife, Ms. Farooq Abdullah, because she had been offended by him. He said he can't defend him because it's against the constitution. So he was transferred to Gujarat and Jagmohan appointed in his place. But he would also, what is revealing is how candid he is in his conversations. His conversation with Sheikh Saab, he says Sheikh Saab would come to me because he was on a strict diet at home, but so he would enjoy the Shami kebabs in Raj Bhavan. Or Farooq Saab, who would come there and say, but let me just find out, let me consult Handu Saab, the law minister, before I commit myself to you. So
Yeah, Landu.
he says, Pyare Lal Handu seemed to be more Pakistani than an Indian as far as I was concerned at that point. That's in his book. So,
Beautiful
but it's
anecdotes.
a remarkable book, a book you should, if I had a recommendation to make, if a single recommendation of a single
I would
book,
like to read that book. Yeah.
it's Biju Nehru's. Of course, he retired in Kasoli with his. I think she was I forget the nationality of his wife. She was European, but I'm not sure which country she belonged to.
Apart from DP, there all of them died in mid 80s, 90 in 80s year, 85, 85 or 86.
Yeah, I mean, PN Haksa was lived up till late 80s, and so did PN Dhar, and so did TN
Namji
Kaul,
Kao,
and
Namji
Namchi
Kao.
Ka. Yes, absolutely.
And P. Andar was the only person who stood by Indira Gandhi and during her emergency days. He was part of the coterie during emergency days because
Yeah, but
Haksar
he
was a
has his
diplomat.
own. He has his own explanations to give for that.
Okay.
Explanation which does not really amount to a justification. But sometimes you're caught in circumstances beyond your control, between loyalty to someone who you has elevated you to that position, who's and then thoughtlessly out, which might now be seen as political expediency rather than a sign of integrity and being brave. So these are conflicting choices. I mean, these are kind of Hamletian choices that to be or not to be is that famous soliloquy by one of the most famous monologues in Shakespeare. But that
Shakespeare.
reflects that indecision. What should I do? Which is in all of us. Should I plunge into politics? Should I stay on academic? Should I stay in India? Should I stay in Australia? Should I have joined the Indian Police Service? Should I have journeyed through this academics? These are dilemmas which you can never
Unsolved.
answer
And
whether
there,
you made the right choice, whether you made the right choice. But as long as at the end of the day you are guided by a vision, and my vision has always been the one which Tagore Gurudev gave to us, which is that you work to ceaselessly, tirelessly, energetically, wherever you can, whenever you can, to create a nation where the mind is without fear and the head
mind
is
is
held high, where knowledge is free, and where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depths of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason, Jugalji, has not lost its way into the dreary desert of dead habit, where the mind, Jugalji, is led forward by thee, God, into ever widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom. Together, you and me and the audience should pray, my Father, let my country awake.
Thank you. That's so wonderful. So wonderful. Gurudev's poem, one of the famous poems you spoke with so eloquence, and you are deeply ingrained into its substance and its context. And really, everybody is loving this show. And there are a number of people who are asking questions. Just if you're not exhausted, we'll finish it within a second. Just we'll have a small photo tour. Just I'm a bioscope wala. I take people to I run those bioscopes as used to be run in the streets in our younger age. So I'll just go for a photo tour, simple photo tour. We have already done it. This is the Indira Gandhi ji, and this is TN Call in the younger days, and this is DP Bhai speaking something to Manik Shah. Yes, and this is PN Dar Saab and Tiki Bhai again, and Tiki Bhai here again, and this is the deadpan face cowboy PN Huxer, and this is the book probably written by I don't know, but probably by Huxer. I probably by Huxer. I could not have a discussion. We'll have another discussion on it sometimes later. Story of my childhood. It's like a biography. Even Ramji Kao has not even written a biography, to one line of his biography, but a bit of biography written by, Aksar Saab. And then we have these books, I don't know, this is something, uh, Piandar, Evolution of Economic Policy of India. In case you want to intervene somewhere, you can please, sir. This is T.N. Cole, Reminiscences. Oh, it looks like Reminiscences. And this is something, Demand for Energy in Northwest India, Piandar. And this is probably your ancestor.
My
Uh,
great grandfather, Pandit Suraj Kak Mattoo, who brought up Kashmiri Muslim orphans as his own children. This is a painting by M.N. Dar, who used to be a great painter. And this is hangs in our dining room in Srinagar.
oh, that's so.
So he was someone who served within the Dogra administration, but was again someone who, when he sat down to eat, he would insist there would be 100 people eating with him from all uh, sections of society.
You will not exclude. That's so wonderful. He looks like a Raja, an emperor. And this is
This is my
another
great great grandfather, Pandit Tarachand Mattu, known as also a great philanthropist.
parental side, paternal
All,
side, or
all my, all these are my parental side, my father's side, my paternal side is the one who are the rich and famous by in material terms and also in terms of philanthropy. My mother's side is the people who are rich in the world of ideas.
and aspirants. And this one?
This is again Pandit Suraj Kakmattu.
Okay,
And Mehjur actually wrote a poem about how he brought up Kashmiri Muslims as his orphans.
that's
This is
so.
from Muhammad Din Firak, and this is, of course, myself with Ram Madhav and Shashi Tharoor,
Madhavji, Shashi Tharoor.
and I
I
think
don't have
Balkha.
all the pictures here, but here you are with,
His
some of.
Holiness, one of the person who inspires me the most, who on a daily basis makes me do as much as I can in a compassionate, generous way.
That's what. Everybody, yeah, there are many. This is Sita Ramaya and
Honorable Minister Sitaraman.
Honorable Minister Sita Ramaya. And you are with the Ahmad Karzai, probably. It is
Uh,
Afghanistan.
yeah, this is in his palace.
In his palace in Afghanistan. Okay.
Yeah, when he was president.
Oh. And this is you being conferred with Padamshri Award.
By President Pratibha Devi Singh Patil.
And this is the big man, Amitabh Bachchan. I mean, two
Yeah,
Amitabhs.
this is in Melbourne at the governor's residence there.
And this is again with the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, and that is with my public relations officer, RF Khatib, a person of great leadership qualities himself.
And here you are with Narendra Bhai Modi. You are with
Yeah,
Adani,
Prime
Narendra Bhai
Minister.
Modi. And third one, I don't know. A third one,
Third is by the richest woman in Australia, Gina Hancock. She
Gina
owns
Hancock.
most of the mines in Western Australia. Hancock Prospecting.
I had enough of photographs with me, but since time is running short, so I'll be just talking. If you have time, if you are really interested, we can proceed further for a bit about your books. We'll conclude on that. A brief account. I will just you have been publishing recently. There was a book on the talk in the
This
public
is
domain.
a book which is being released by the Honorable Minister Smriti Irani ji on the
Yeah,
13th of December and at the India International Center NX Court. It's a book which is, as I said, it goes to my childhood days when we heard stories from the Mahabharata
right.
and to my training as an international relations scholar and to my, in some ways, concerns about the planet. So it tries to look back into the Mahabharata and look at stories, words of wisdom, including those which take a non anthropocentric view of the world, a much more larger vision of the planet. And in times when we face extinction, distinct possibility of extinction and climate change, Mahabharata can serve as a guide, as a some lessons that we can generate from, including stories that often people are not aware of. There's a parrot which stands by a tree which is falling apart and stands by that tree through that period of terrible uh, challenges that the tree faces, and familiar stories, including the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Here is Arjuna and says, how can I kill all these human beings, my brothers, my sisters, my cousins,
Cousins.
my gurus? What can I? How there is no way I can do this. And what Krishna explains to him, the whole concept of dharma, the whole concept of action rather than passivity, and the whole concept of moral consequentialism, where sometimes alone means can justify the ends.
That's so
So,
true.
through these stories, we hope we can capture the imagination of a reading public, also to inspire them to be more generous in spirit, to do more for animals, other living beings, as well as for your fellow citizens and fellow men and women. Because what we lack often in a day which is driving us, overwhelming us with its technological advancement and
Dynamics,
consumerism,
present day
is that
consumerism.
you often lose your moorings, you often
Yes,
lose your direction. The book, which we hope will help people find their moorings,
it's so wonderful. It's so
rediscover their
wonderful.
moorings from ancient wisdom.
That's so wonderful. I mean, talking about, I really use. I was very fond of Dharamveer Bharti. He wrote this Andayug. It was taken from the Mahabharata. Mahabharata is always a great epic, and Gita is a great epic. And you can utilize this thing. Now it's being published all across the globe. Our prime
Mm.
minister, wherever he goes, he takes Gita along with and gifts it to the heads of the states wherever he goes. It's a great ancient Oriental wisdom. It makes, especially as you said, the challenges of contemporary times, the corporatization, you lose your moorings. Children who are confused, present, there is a chaos all over. And sometimes down the line, if we go back to the through these stories, through these anecdotes, through these stories, we refresh ourselves. We are connected with the spirit, and that's what the Oriental wisdom is.
And that is why I think it's so important for all of us to recognize that the slogan that was coined in the context of the G20, but derived from our ancient Upanishads, is so important. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one
Vasudeva,
planet, one family, one future. Much more
one
relevant,
planet, one.
much more needed than ever before.
That's so wonderful, sir. With that wonderful note and a poem from the Gurudev, I would like to just put a very small couplet. परवाज है दोनों की इसी एक फजा में, परवाज है दोनों की इसी एक फजा में, करगिस का जहां और है, शाही का जहां और है. I am putting, this is Iqbal's poetry, and certainly you are coming to this show. It was your magnanimity. Every bit of this show is a learning. It's an enchantment. It's an enlightenment. I'm really, thankful to you. I'm really grateful to you that you came, for the audience, for the diaspora, for the researchers, for the youngsters who watch Sheetalnath conversations. And this will go to the archives. This will remain there for inspiring all the children, all the people who are the seekers of Sheetalnath conversation. I'm really grateful, sir. You came out of your very busy scheduled time, and with so much love and affection, you poured out your all intellect and your moorings, your understanding about these great men to which we all should be proud of. Thank you very much, Amitabh. You came.
Namaskar, Mara.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. So that was Amitabh Mattoo, Padamshri Amitabh Mattoo, and I hope you enjoyed this session on the Gang of Four. And we knew about these great personalities, but none other than Amitabh Mattoo Sahab. And certainly his coming has made this today's program very enchanting, very interesting, very informative. And certainly this is going to be in our archives. This will remain available there. You can all view it, and you can all just spread this particular video and forward this video to the all kind of people who are interested to in this in this kind of knowing these stories about our legends, our people. Thank you very much for connecting today with all of us. And I'm once again really grateful to Amitabhji that he came and he had a conversation at Shitanath Conversations 96th historic show. Thank you very much. That was so great of you. Good night. Shabakher.